I found out my husband had been lying to me for 5 years in the most ordinary place imaginable, an elevator that smelled faintly like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. It was 11:42 p.m., and I'd just wrapped my third straight night of overtime. My head felt packed with cotton, my eyes dry from staring at code, and all I wanted was my bed and maybe half a glass of cheap wine before I passed out. I stepped into the elevator alone, heels in hand, laptop bag sliding off my shoulder. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I leaned against the mirrored wall and pressed the lobby button. That's when it hit me. 7 years, I murmured, turning my wedding ring around my finger. Our anniversary. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly predictable. Another year of celebrating a marriage through a screen. Another late-night message from across the world. Another promise that once his overseas project ended, we'd finally start our real life together. The doors slid open again on the 12th floor. A man stepped in, loosening his tie, muttering under his breath about conference calls. I barely looked up, until he froze. Jess? My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. I turned, and recognition landed between us like a brick. Daniel? I blinked. Oh my God. I haven't seen you in, 3 years? He nodded slowly. Yeah. Since the Nairobi briefing. My chest tightened at the mention of Africa. Of Michael. We did the usual small talk, work, hours, exhaustion. But something was off. Daniel kept glancing at me like I was fragile. Or maybe stupid. I couldn't tell which. Finally he said, carefully, "So, how's Mike doing these days?" The question warmed me instantly, the way it always did. Busy as ever, I said with a tired smile. We haven't been able to video chat much lately. Signal issues again. Silence. Not awkward silence. Heavy silence. I frowned. What? Daniel's jaw flexed. He looked at the closing elevator doors, then back at me. Jess, he said quietly, you really don't know? Every nerve in my body went cold. Know what? He exhaled through his nose like someone about to step onto thin ice. Michael came back to the States 5 years ago. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The elevator hummed downward. The lights flickered slightly. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tired, confused. I laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind you make when someone says something so wrong your brain rejects it. That's not funny. I'm not joking. The words landed hard. Flat. Final. My hand shot out, slamming against the door sensor so it wouldn't open at the lobby. Say that again, I whispered. Daniel swallowed. The Africa project ended 5 years ago. We flew back together. He told me he was going home to surprise you. The world tilted. That's impossible, I said automatically. We talk every week. He sends photos. Locations. Jess. His voice dropped. Those things can be faked. My ears started ringing. No, I said. No. You're mistaken. You have to be. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I didn't want to get involved, he said. But last year I saw him in Midtown. With a woman. He turned the screen toward me. I wish I could say I didn't recognize him right away. I did. Michael, laughing, arm around a young brunette's shoulders, walking into a glass-fronted restaurant. He was wearing the navy jacket I'd mailed to Africa for his birthday. My knees nearly gave out. The timestamp glowed at the bottom of the photo. 6 months ago. 6 months ago he told me he was hiking through remote terrain with no signal for 2 weeks. The elevator chimed at the lobby. Doors opened. People stepped in around us. But all I could see was that photo, and the man I'd spent 6 years waiting for, living an entirely different life. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It froze. I don't remember leaving the building. 1 minute I was in the elevator staring at Michael's smiling face on Daniel's phone, alive, well, domestic, and the next I was outside in the parking garage, standing beside my car with my keys in my hand and absolutely no idea how I'd gotten there. The concrete smelled damp. A car alarm chirped somewhere. My pulse thudded in my ears like distant machinery. 5 years. 5. My brain kept snagging on that number like a torn thread. I slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. My reflection stared back from the dark windshield, smeared mascara, pale skin, hair escaping its clip. I looked small. Hollow. Like someone who'd been quietly erased. My phone buzzed. Michael. The contact name alone felt obscene now. My fingers hovered over the screen. Hey love. Crazy week here. Might be offline a few days, heading out to a rural site. Miss you. Timestamp, 11:51 p.m. 9 minutes after I'd seen the photo. My stomach lurched. I opened the attached picture. Michael stood beside a dusty Jeep, scrubland stretching behind him. Sun glare washed the sky white. He wore a wrinkled button-down and that same easy grin, the one that used to make me feel chosen. I zoomed in. The shadows were wrong. His feet didn't quite meet the ground. The lighting on his face didn't match the horizon. Edges too sharp in places, too blurred in others. I'd spent years editing images for presentations and client decks. This was composited. Sloppy, even. A strange, distant clarity slid into place inside me, like ice forming over deep water. He's not there. The realization didn't feel explosive. It felt quiet. Precise. Clinical. Michael wasn't in Africa. Michael hadn't been in Africa for 5 years. Michael had been here. Living. Eating. Touching someone. While I waited. My hands began to shake, not wildly, just a fine vibration under the skin. Another buzz. Wish you were here tonight. Happy early anniversary in case I lose signal. My breath stopped. Early anniversary. Because of the time difference. Because he was ahead. Because he was supposedly on another continent. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. For 7 years I'd structured my life around that lie, time zones, call windows, holiday shipments, countdowns. I'd defended him when friends hinted it was weird. I'd explained away missed visits, cancelled flights, unstable connections. I'd built my marriage around absence. And he'd let me. No, he'd engineered it. The grief hit then, but not how I expected. Not sobbing. Not screaming. It came as memory fragments, sliding through me one after another. Me eating anniversary takeout alone at our kitchen counter while he worked late at the compound. Me mailing care packages, socks, protein bars, handwritten letters, to an address he provided. Me falling asleep with my laptop open after a dropped video call, his frozen pixelated face still on screen. 5 years. 5 years of devotion aimed at a ghost. My chest tightened until breathing felt optional. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. Okay, I whispered hoarsely. The word surprised me. Okay. Because beneath the shock, beneath the nausea and grief and humiliation, something else was surfacing. Questions. Sharp ones. If he'd been back 5 years, where had he lived? Whose apartment? Whose bed? Who was the woman in the photo? How many people knew? How carefully had he built this second life? My phone buzzed again. I love you, Jess. Always. Always. The word landed wrong now. Crooked. Rotten at the core. I stared at it for a long time. Then, very slowly, I wiped my cheeks, straightened in my seat, and opened our message thread. Years of texts filled the screen: affection, logistics, longing, patience. A digital marriage. Evidence. A strange calm settled over me, not forgiveness, not acceptance. Assessment. Michael thought he was safe. He thought distance protected him. He thought I was still waiting exactly where he left me. A faint, cold smile touched my mouth. He had no idea I'd just stepped into the same city he'd been hiding in for 5 years. And I was done waiting. I didn't go home that night. The thought of walking into the apartment Michael and I had shared before his deployment, the framed wedding photo, the untouched half of the closet, the carefully preserved illusion, made my skin crawl. Instead, I drove. No destination. No music. Just the low hum of tires over asphalt and the rhythmic sweep of streetlights across the windshield. My brain had shifted into a strange, hyper-focused mode. Shock hadn't faded, it had crystallized. Everything felt sharper. Colder. As if some emotional anesthetic had been replaced with calculation. 5 years. That number still echoed, but now it carried structure. 5 years meant leases. Bills. Addresses. Coworkers. Patterns. No one lives in a city that long without leaving footprints. Michael wasn't a ghost. He was a man with routines. And routines can be traced. By the time I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot at 1:18 a.m., I already had the beginnings of a plan. Inside, fluorescent lights washed everything pale. A bored waitress handed me coffee without asking. I slid into a vinyl booth and opened my laptop. Step 1, confirm. Not emotionally, factually. I logged into our shared cloud storage. Years of folders, Africa expenses, travel reimbursements, compound photos, project reports. The digital scaffolding of his lie. I opened the most recent expense sheet. My pulse ticked once. Twice. The formatting had changed 3 years ago. Michael was obsessive about templates. Fonts, alignment, color codes, he never altered them. Not once in a decade of marriage and joint finances. Except here. I scrolled. Metadata panel. File origin, New York, New York. Date created, 3 days ago. I sat very still. Every file in the past 5 years carried similar tags: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. All East Coast. All domestic. Not Africa. Never Africa. My throat tightened, but the tears didn't come. They'd been replaced by something denser. Evidence stacking neatly, piece by piece. I opened the photo directory next. Hundreds of images, dusty roads, construction sites, village kids, equipment yards. The life he claimed. I right-clicked one at random. Properties. Camera, iPhone 12. Michael had switched to a newer model 4 years ago. I'd mailed it to him myself. This photo predated that. I checked another. Same camera. Another. Same. He'd been recycling old photos. 4 years. A sound escaped me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. The audacity. The sheer laziness of it. My husband hadn't even needed to try that hard, because I'd never doubted him enough to look closely. The waitress refilled my coffee. I thanked her automatically, eyes still on the screen. Step 2, locate. I pulled up our joint tax returns. Michael's income streams listed his employer, the same international engineering firm he'd always worked for. But payroll location codes were visible in the back-end documents. I searched the company directory. Michael Turner. Senior Project Manager. Office, New York Regional. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. There it was. Physical proof of presence. I leaned back in the booth, staring at the glowing screen while the diner's refrigerator units hummed behind the counter. He lived here. Worked here. Walked these same streets. Maybe passed me once without either of us noticing. The thought made something twist deep in my chest: grief, yes, but also a dawning, razor-edged clarity. He hadn't just abandoned me. He'd curated me, maintained me like a storage unit of devotion he could visit whenever convenient, texts, calls, affection on demand, while he built another life uninterrupted. I opened a blank document. Title, Michael, Timeline. Year 1 return. Year 2 apartment. Year 3 promotion. Year 4 relationship overlap. Year 5 current status. My fingers moved steadily, building columns, dates, files, inconsistencies, confirmations. The waitress eventually asked if I wanted food. I shook my head without looking up. By 3:07 a.m., I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. Michael had been back in the US for 5 years. He worked in New York. And he believed I had no idea. I closed the laptop slowly. For the first time since the elevator, anger finally surfaced, not explosive, not wild. Controlled. Like heat under glass. 5 years of lies. 5 years of waiting. 5 years of humiliation he assumed I'd never discover. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee mug and stared into the dark liquid. Okay, I murmured again. But this time, the word meant something different. Because confirmation was done. And the next step wasn't finding him. It was deciding exactly how much of his life I intended to take apart. I went home at dawn. The apartment looked exactly the same as it always had, painfully neat, faintly lavender from the diffuser I kept refilling out of habit, the couch still draped with the throw Michael liked even though he hadn't sat on it in half a decade. For years, I'd treated the space like a paused life. Not abandoned. Not moved on. Just, waiting. His shoes still lined one side of the closet. His old jackets hung in garment bags. The framed photo from our wedding sat on the entry table, me laughing up at him, his forehead pressed to mine like I was gravity. I stood there staring at it, key still in my hand. 5 years. He'd been building another home while this one stayed frozen in loyalty. My chest tightened, grief pushing up, hot and sharp, but it didn't break me the way it would have 24 hours ago. Because now I knew something crucial. This wasn't loss. It was theft. He hadn't just left. He'd taken years of my life under false pretenses and stored me in emotional suspension. That shift, from abandoned wife to deceived partner, changed the texture of everything. I set my keys down and walked straight to the bedroom. The closet door slid open with a soft rasp. His side smelled faintly of cedar and cologne that had long since evaporated. I ran my fingers over the hanging shirts, fabrics I'd bought, folded, shipped, or preserved. A museum exhibit of a man who hadn't existed for me in years. My gaze dropped to the top shelf. The storage box. Inside were the letters. Every handwritten page he'd mailed from Africa. Care packages of intimacy, descriptions of sunsets, construction challenges, lonely nights missing me. Ink smudges. Creased corners. Postmarks from various countries. I pulled the box down and carried it to the bed. For a moment, my hands hesitated. These had been sacred once. Proof of devotion across distance. Now they were evidence. I opened the lid. Paper and time breathed out. I picked the most recent letter, dated 8 months ago, and unfolded it carefully. Jess. You'd love the mornings here. My eyes scanned the page differently now, not as a wife savoring closeness, but as someone analyzing deception. Details were vague. Landscapes generic. No names of colleagues. No specific towns. Just emotional texture, longing, fatigue, love. He'd written exactly what I needed to hear. Nothing verifiable. I checked the envelope. Postmark, Newark, New Jersey. My stomach dropped, not from shock this time, but from confirmation. All of them were domestic. I spread letters across the bed, flipping envelopes, scanning stamps. New Jersey. Connecticut. New York. Never Africa. Not once. The room felt very quiet. Sunlight edged through the blinds, laying pale stripes across paper and sheets, across the artifacts of a fabricated marriage. 5 years of performance. My throat tightened, but still no tears came. Instead, something heavier settled into place. Understanding. Michael hadn't maintained me out of guilt. He'd maintained me because it was easy. Low effort. High reward. Emotional loyalty on standby. A wife who required nothing physically but supplied affection endlessly. And I'd cooperated. Because I believed him. The humiliation flickered, quick and hot, then cooled into something steadier. Resolve. I gathered the letters into neat stacks by year. Patterns emerged quickly, increased vagueness over time, shorter intervals between mailings, more generic language. The farther his real life progressed, the less effort he invested in the fiction. That meant escalation. A new relationship. Deeper entanglement. Maybe cohabitation. The brunette in Daniel's photo surfaced in my mind, her arm around Michael's waist, comfortable, intimate. She didn't look temporary. Which meant there was another woman living a version of my marriage. The thought landed with unexpected clarity. She probably has no idea I exist either. The realization shifted something again. This wasn't a triangle. It was parallel lives. Michael at the center, curating realities for each of us. I sat back on my heels on the bed, surrounded by letters, sunlight, and the stale echo of devotion. Okay, I said quietly into the empty room. The word felt steadier each time I spoke it. Because the emotional storm had passed its peak. What remained was focus. Michael had built a double life for 5 years without consequences. He believed distance made him untouchable. He believed I would remain exactly where he left me, faithful, patient, unquestioning. A slow, deliberate calm spread through my chest. He was wrong. I reached for my phone and opened a new note. Michael, personal. Address. Partner. Routine. Overlap timeline. Exposure options. My thumb hovered, then added one more line. Maximum impact. I stared at the words for a long moment. 5 years of stolen time. 5 years of quiet betrayal. He thought he'd engineered safety. But he'd actually created something far more dangerous. A wife with nothing left to lose. And I was finally ready to meet the man who'd been living 5 years without me. By mid-morning, my apartment no longer looked like a shrine. It looked like an archive. I'd cleared the dining table and covered it with documents, letters sorted by year, printed expense sheets, photo metadata screenshots, tax forms, call logs. Evidence arranged in clean rows like I was preparing a case instead of dismantling a marriage. Maybe I was. The strange part was how calm I felt. 24 hours ago, my life had been a story about distance and devotion. Now it was about fraud. And fraud, unlike heartbreak, had structure. Paper trails. Timelines. Motive. I could work with that. I brewed coffee, tied my hair back, and sat down with my laptop. Step 3, Routine Mapping. Michael's company profile listed standard office hours. Cross-referencing that with our message history produced patterns fast. He texted me most between 7 to 9 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. midnight my time. If he were truly in Africa, those would be random. But in New York? Morning commute. Late evening after work. My jaw tightened. I plotted timestamps across a spreadsheet. Weekdays showed consistent midday silence, exactly when he'd be in office meetings. Weekend gaps aligned with social hours. Holiday fluctuations matched U.S. calendars, not African ones. 5 years of behavioral data. All domestic. I leaned back, staring at the grid. It was almost impressive, the discipline of it. He'd maintained a time zone fiction while living locally, keeping communication windows believable enough to avoid suspicion. He'd planned this carefully. Which meant he valued the double life enough to sustain it long term. The thought sharpened my focus. If he'd invested that much effort, exposure would cost him more than embarrassment. It would cost him everything he'd built. I opened Daniel's photo again, the restaurant entrance, Michael's arm around the brunette. I zoomed into the background signage. The restaurant name was partially visible in mirrored glass. I reversed the image. Letters resolved. I searched. Upper West Side. Reservation heavy. Upscale. Date night territory. So that's where you take her. My chest pinched, not jealousy exactly, but the raw awareness of replacement. He hadn't just lied. He'd reassigned. I forced the emotion down and opened maps. Nearby residential buildings. Lease databases. Property tax records. Linked addresses. It took 40 minutes. Then his name appeared. Michael Turner. Co-tenant. 2-bedroom condo. Purchased 3 years ago. My breath slowed. Owned, not rented. Shared asset. Commitment level, permanent. I clicked the co-owner line. Emily Carter. The name sat there quietly, reshaping my understanding. She wasn't casual. She was life partner. 3 years of cohabitation layered over 5 years of marital deception. I sat very still. Emily Carter. Did she know? Had he told her he was divorced? Widowed? Never married? Or was she living inside a parallel lie just like mine? The possibility shifted something unexpectedly. If she was deceived too, she wasn't my enemy. She was collateral. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion finally creeping in. This wasn't just revenge territory anymore. It was systemic. Michael at the center. 2 women orbiting separate narratives. He'd stolen time from both of us. My gaze drifted across the table, letters, photos, documents, timelines. The physical mass of 5 years' worth of manipulation. Anger surfaced again, deeper now. Not explosive. Moral. He'd rewritten reality for convenience. Used devotion as infrastructure. And assumed discovery would never happen. A slow, deliberate clarity settled in. Exposure alone wasn't enough. If I simply confronted him, he'd scramble, deny, deflect, contain damage. Maybe even sacrifice one life to preserve the other. No. That would let him choose. He didn't deserve choice. I opened a new tab and searched Emily Carter. Social profiles surfaced quickly, public enough to read, private enough to suggest normalcy. Marketing director. Charity events. Book clubs. Brunch photos. Smiling beside Michael in several shots. No wedding ring. But unmistakable intimacy. 3 years documented in filtered sunlight and restaurant interiors. My throat tightened at one image, them decorating a Christmas tree together in the condo. The same December he'd told me he'd spent holidays on site due to supply delays. I closed the browser. Pain flared, quick, surgical, then cooled into resolve. This wasn't about reclaiming him. It was about dismantling the architecture of lies he'd built around himself. And architecture collapses best from within. I returned to my note and added, Emily, contact strategy. The words felt heavy. Because once I crossed that line, nothing would remain contained. 2 lives would fracture simultaneously. His. Hers. Mine had already. I sat back, staring at the name Emily Carter glowing on my screen. Somewhere in New York, she was living a relationship she believed was real. Just like I had yesterday. My chest tightened, not with pity exactly, but recognition. We were strangers. But we shared the same man. And the same betrayal. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I whispered. Because the next move wouldn't just expose Michael. It would bring his entire double life crashing into one shared reality. And I needed to decide exactly how, and when, that collision would happen. I didn't contact Emily that day. Or the next. Revenge, real revenge, isn't impulsive. It's architectural. And architecture requires load-bearing points, pressure timing, structural awareness. If I reached out too early, Michael could still maneuver. He could preempt, confess selectively, frame me as unstable, jealous, vindictive, whatever version preserved his primary life. No. First contact needed to be undeniable. Self-authenticating truth. Evidence that bypassed his narrative entirely. So I waited. And I watched. The next 3 days settled into a strange double existence. Outwardly, nothing changed. I answered work emails, attended meetings, grocery shopped, watered plants. I even responded to Michael's messages with the same warm shorthand we'd always used. Miss you today. Wish we had dinner together. Counting down to when you're home. He replied instantly, as always. Soon, Jess. I promise. You're my forever girl. No one compares. The words slid over me now like oil over glass. I studied them instead of feeling them. Language patterns. Timing. Emotional calibration. He hadn't sensed anything. Which told me something crucial: he'd grown comfortable. 5 years without detection breeds complacency. Ritual replaces caution. That was useful. On the 4th evening, I took the train into Manhattan. I dressed carefully, neutral coat, low heels, hair loose but ordinary. Not a disguise. Just someone unremarkable enough to disappear in city density. Michael's condo building rose from a quiet Upper West Side street, polished stone facade, discreet canopy, soft-lit lobby. The kind of place you buy when you're building permanence. I stood across the street beside a newspaper kiosk, heart beating steady but deep. This wasn't confrontation. This was confirmation. At 6:12 p.m., he appeared. Michael. Alive. Local. Real. He stepped out of the building wearing a charcoal coat, phone to his ear, expression animated in the way I remembered from years ago, relaxed, engaged, present. Not pixelated. Not lagging through a bad connection. Not distant across continents. Here. My lungs tightened. For a split second, grief surged, the raw, animal shock of seeing your husband exist in a reality you weren't part of. But then another figure joined him. Emily. She slipped her arm through his with easy familiarity, laughing at something he said. Her hair caught the streetlight, copper gold. She leaned into him instinctively, like muscle memory. They looked settled. Couple-shaped. My marriage, displaced into another body. I watched them walk past me, 3 feet away, neither noticing. He smelled the same. That faint cedar cologne. My stomach lurched, but I stayed still. Because this moment mattered. The abstract betrayal I'd been analyzing for days crystallized into physical fact. Michael Turner, my husband, lived here. Loved here. Touched here. With her. They crossed at the corner and headed toward Broadway, probably dinner, maybe drinks. Routine evening intimacy. I followed at a distance, just enough to confirm patterns. Restaurant greetings by name. Shared menu decisions without discussion. His hand resting automatically at her lower back when they walked. 3 years minimum of embedded behavior. I didn't stay long. I had what I needed. On the subway ride back, my reflection in the window looked different, not broken, not stunned. Witnessed. There's a psychological shift that happens when suspicion becomes sight. When theory becomes embodiment. When betrayal stops being a story and becomes a scene you can replay in sensory detail. It removes doubt permanently. By the time I reached my stop, grief had burned down to something denser. Certainty. He hadn't just lied. He'd replaced. Built a second domestic life while maintaining me as emotional infrastructure. And Emily, whether she knew or not, lived inside that structure too. Back home, I opened my laptop and added to the file. Observed, shared residence confirmed. Physical intimacy consistent with long-term cohabitation. Public familiarity established. Clinical language helped. It kept the pain contained in categories. But one new realization sat heavier than the rest. Michael wasn't juggling two casual relationships. He was sustaining two marriages. One physical. One remote. And both built on false consent. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion and clarity mixing into a cold, steady focus. Exposure now wasn't just personal. It was corrective. Two women deserved the same reality. Simultaneously. I opened a blank message window addressed to Emily Carter. My fingers hovered above the keys. Not yet. Because the collision had to happen at maximum structural stress, when denial was impossible, escape routes closed, narratives unsalvageable. I closed the draft without typing. Soon. Very soon. Michael believed his two lives were safely parallel. He had no idea they were about to intersect. And when they did, nothing he'd built over 5 years would remain standing. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence anymore. It was continuing to be his wife. Every morning that week, I woke to a "good morning, beautiful" text from a man who had kissed another woman goodbye on his way to work. Every night, I told him I missed him. And he told me he loved me. The words had turned to static, sounds without sincerity, but I still had to respond convincingly enough to keep him unaware. Because timing mattered now more than proof. I needed overlap. Verifiable, simultaneous contradiction. Something that shattered both realities at once. So I maintained routine. I sent photos of my day, coffee cups, spreadsheets, sunsets from my window, the same harmless domestic snapshots I'd always shared. He replied with recycled affection and occasional stock images of Africa pulled from his archive. I cataloged each one. Metadata. Reuse frequency. Inconsistencies. By Friday, a pattern emerged. He sent emotional texts late evenings after 10:30 p.m. Likely when Emily slept. Which meant his attention windows were divided, not blended. Separate marriages. Separate time blocks. The compartmentalization was almost elegant. It made me nauseous. That same Friday, he wrote. Might be off-grid most of next week. Field inspections in remote area. Don't worry if I'm quiet. I stared at the message for a long time. Next week. Opportunity. If he claimed remote absence while physically present in New York, contradiction could be forced in real time. I typed back. I hate when you disappear like that. But I know your work matters. Just come back to me. 3 dots appeared instantly. Always. You're my home, Jess. The sentence hit differently now. Not sweet. Strategic. He'd always framed me as emotional anchor, the stable constant he returned to. Meanwhile, his actual daily life existed elsewhere. He wasn't divided. He was hierarchical. Emily was present life. I was preserved devotion. The realization settled like cold iron. I closed the chat and opened my calendar. Next week. I marked Tuesday evening. Prime couple hour. Post-work. Pre-sleep. High probability both of us would be engaged with him in separate contexts. Collision window. Now the question wasn't if. It was how. Saturday afternoon, I returned to the Upper West Side. Not surveillance this time. Environment study. The condo building sat on a quiet tree-lined block, dog walkers, strollers, grocery bags. Domestic normalcy. The kind of neighborhood where relationships root deep. I walked past twice, noting sightlines, entry timing, security patterns. Residents entered via key fob. Guests buzzed through intercom. Front desk attendant during daytime, none evenings. Useful. I stopped at the cafe on the corner, line of sight to the entrance, and ordered tea I didn't drink. At 4:38 p.m., Emily exited alone carrying 2 shopping bags. I watched her move, relaxed, unguarded. She checked her phone, smiled faintly, typed something. Probably him. My stomach twisted, not with jealousy, but recognition. This was me once. Trusting. Integrated into his daily rhythm. She turned back inside after a minute, door closing softly behind her. I exhaled slowly. She deserved truth. But truth alone wasn't enough. It needed to land in the exact context of his lie, in his presence, inside the shared reality he'd constructed. Simultaneous exposure. No preparation time. No narrative control. I opened my notebook and wrote. Goal, unified reality event. Conditions, both women plus Michael present. State, active contradiction, Africa claim. Method, direct revelation with evidence. The word steadied me. Because this wasn't rage anymore. It was correction. Sunday night, Michael called, voice warm, intimate, familiar. Miss hearing you, he said softly. Next week might be rough signal-wise. I closed my eyes, picturing him in that condo living room, Emily maybe in the next room, unaware. Just come back safe, I said. I always do. The lie slid through him effortlessly. No hesitation. No strain. 5 years had made deception reflexive. We talked 15 minutes. I mirrored affection perfectly. He never sensed distance. When the call ended, I sat in silence a long time. Tuesday. 3 days. By then he'd have told me he was unreachable. And he'd be here. With her. I opened Emily's contact profile again. Her email. Her number. Her workplace address. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Soon. Very soon. Because Michael believed his greatest protection was separation. 2 women in different worlds. 2 narratives never touching. But on Tuesday evening, those worlds were going to meet. And when they did, the man at the center of both would finally have nowhere left to stand. Tuesday arrived with eerie calm. No thunderclap realization. No last-minute doubt. Just the steady sense of approaching inevitability, like a train already in motion, destination fixed. Michael texted at 7:14 a.m. Heading out today. Signal might drop anytime. Don't worry if I disappear. Right on schedule. I replied. I'll miss you. Be safe out there. He sent a heart. At 8:02 a.m., I booked my train to Manhattan. The day unfolded in strange normalcy, emails, coffee, polite conversations, all layered over the quiet knowledge that by nightfall, my marriage and his second life would occupy the same room. At 5:10 p.m., I dressed. Nothing dramatic. Dark jeans, cream sweater, wool coat. The version of me he remembered, familiar enough to trigger recognition, composed enough to carry truth without theatrics. I packed carefully, printed letters, tax documents, photocopies, timeline summary. Physical evidence, not digital, undeniable in hand. By 6:03 p.m., I stood across from his building again. Lights glowed warm in the lobby. Early evening residents filtered in, grocery bags, gym clothes, normal lives. I checked my phone. No new messages from him. Of course not. He was offline. At 6:17 p.m., the front door opened. Michael stepped out alone, adjusting his cuff. He looked ordinary. Not villainous, not anxious. Just a man about to meet his evening. He checked his phone, probably me, then slipped it into his coat. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. This was the last moment he existed in 2 separate worlds. I crossed the street. Michael. My voice carried cleanly in the cold air. He turned. Recognition hit instantly, eyes widening, color draining, breath catching mid-step. Jess? The word came out fractured. For a second, neither of us moved. 5 years of distance collapsed into 10 feet of sidewalk. You're here, he said, voice thin. I walked closer, calm, deliberate. Hi. He looked around instinctively, predator scanning exposure, then back at me, panic rising. How, what, I thought. That you were in Africa? I finished gently. Silence slammed down. His mouth opened. Closed. Shock had stripped him of language. Michael, I said quietly, I need you to take me upstairs. He froze. No, he said reflexively. Jess, this isn't, I can explain. I know you can, I said. You've had 5 years of practice. The words landed clean. His face collapsed inward, guilt, fear, calculation flickering rapidly. Please, I added softly. Let's not do this on the sidewalk. That did it. Public exposure fear outweighed resistance. He swallowed hard and nodded once. The walk to the door felt unreal, him beside me, rigid, me steady, the doorman glancing between us with polite neutrality. Inside, the elevator hummed upward. Neither spoke. At the 14th floor, the doors opened. Michael stepped out like a man approaching a cliff. Unit 14B. He stopped outside it, keys trembling in his hand. Jess, he whispered, please. The plea wasn't for forgiveness. It was for containment. I met his eyes. No. He closed his eyes briefly, acceptance, dread, then unlocked the door. Warm light spilled out. The smell of garlic and rosemary. Home. Emily's voice floated from inside. Mike? You're back early. She appeared in the hallway, sweater sleeves pushed up, wooden spoon in hand, mid-sentence smile fading as she saw me standing beside him. Confusion first. Then alertness. Then something colder. Who is this? She asked quietly. Michael made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a choke and a breath. Emily, I said gently, stepping forward, hi. I'm Jessica. She blinked. Polite reflex. Social mapping. Hi. I held her gaze. I'm Michael's wife. Silence detonated. The spoon slipped from her hand, clattering against tile. Michael staggered back a step like the word had struck him physically. Emily stared at me, then at him, then back again. Wife, she said faintly. I nodded once. 7 years. The room seemed to tilt. Michael whispered, Emily, I. She turned on him with a look that could have cut steel. Don't. One word. Absolute. Her eyes came back to me, searching, disbelieving. Is this some kind of joke? I reached into my bag and held out the first document. Our marriage certificate. Her hand shook as she took it. She read. Once. Twice. Her face drained of all color. The reality he'd kept separated for 5 years had just merged in her hands. And Michael, standing between us, had nowhere left to hide. The silence after she read the certificate felt heavier than sound. Emily's eyes moved slowly across the paper again, like her brain refused to process what it already understood. Michael stood frozen near the wall, shoulders slightly hunched, hands half raised, as if he might physically catch the truth before it landed. It didn't help him. Nothing could now. Emily lifted her gaze from the document to his face. Tell me this is fake, she said. Not loud. Not hysterical. Flat. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Every lie he'd ever practiced collapsed under the weight of physical proof. Emily, he said hoarsely, I was going to. Her hand shot up. Stop. The command cracked through the room. She turned to me again, eyes sharp with disbelief and dawning horror. How long have you known? 5 days, I said. The number hit her visibly, 5 days versus 5 years. Her jaw trembled once. 5 years, she repeated quietly, almost to herself. I nodded. You've lived together 3? She swallowed. Yes. The confirmation settled between us, timeline overlap fully aligned. Parallel lives mapped onto the same man. Michael made a desperate sound. I never meant for. Emily's head snapped toward him. You never meant for what? She demanded. Your wife to exist? The word wife sounded poisonous in her mouth. He flinched. I thought I could. Stop talking, she said again, voice shaking now. Just stop. He did. Because there was nothing he could say that wasn't Ash. Emily's hands lowered slowly, the certificate still clutched in her fingers. Her breathing grew uneven, realization spreading through memory in real time. Past events recontextualizing. Absences. Trips. Excuses. 5 years of moments sliding into new meaning. She looked at me again, and something shifted. Not rivalry. Recognition. You didn't know either, she said quietly. No, I answered. The word carried everything. Her eyes filled instantly, not at me, but at the shared devastation. He told me he was single, she whispered. We met at a conference. He said he'd just moved back from overseas work. My chest tightened. Same narrative. Different audience. I waited for him, I said softly. 5 years. Her lips parted in shock. I thought he was in Africa. The sentence hung in the warm kitchen air, surreal and obscene. Michael made a broken sound behind us. Neither of us looked at him. Because suddenly, the center of gravity in the room had shifted. 2 women facing the same betrayal. The man reduced to perimeter. Emily wiped her eyes hard with the heel of her palm, composure reassembling in jagged pieces. Do you have more? She asked me. I nodded and opened my folder. Letters. Postmarks. Photos. Timeline. I placed them on the counter between us. She read in silence. Each page peeled another layer from the life she thought she knew. At one point she pressed her hand over her mouth, memory colliding with evidence, then kept going. Michael sank into a chair, face in his hands. Unseen. Irrelevant. When she finished, Emily set the papers down carefully. Her face had changed. Grief still there, but now edged with fury. How long, she asked him without turning, were you planning to keep this up? He didn't answer. Because any answer was monstrous. Forever, she pressed. 2 homes? 2 wives? Rotate holidays? Emily. She turned then. I'd never seen someone look at another human being with such complete annihilation. Don't say my name, she said. Each word distinct. You don't get to. He flinched again, shoulders collapsing inward. 5 years of control dissolving in minutes. Emily's breathing steadied slowly, anger consolidating into cold clarity. Then she looked at me once more. What do you want? She asked. The question surprised me. Not accusatory. Practical. I met her gaze. Truth, I said. For both of us. Her eyes searched mine, testing for agenda, jealousy, manipulation. Finding none. Because this was no longer about winning him. It was about dismantling him. She nodded once. Okay. The word sounded very much like mine had days earlier. Not acceptance. Decision. She turned to Michael. You're leaving. He stared up at her, stunned. Emily, this is my. No, she said. This is our condo. And you don't exist in it anymore. He looked at me helplessly, like I might intervene. I didn't move. He had finally arrived at the reality he'd constructed for us, exclusion. His mouth opened once more, but no defense remained. 2 witnesses. 1 truth. 0 exits. Emily stepped back from him entirely. You have 10 minutes, she said. And for the first time since I'd spoken his name outside, Michael Turner understood he had lost both lives at once. Michael packed in silence. Not the orderly, practiced silence of a traveler preparing for a trip, but the disjointed, stunned movements of someone whose reality had collapsed faster than his brain could follow. He moved through the bedroom like a ghost, displacing himself, opening drawers, closing them again, grabbing shirts without folding, dropping toiletries into a bag with shaking hands. Emily stood in the kitchen, arms folded tight across her chest. I stayed beside the counter, documents still spread between us, the physical remains of his double life laid bare. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left that wasn't already obvious. After a few minutes, he emerged with a duffel half-zipped, eyes red, face hollow. "Jess," he said quietly. My name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth now. I looked at him. Really looked, not at the husband I'd waited for, not at the pixelated face across time zones, but at the man standing here stripped of every narrative he'd constructed. He looked smaller. Ordinary. Not the center of anything. "I never stopped loving you," he said. The sentence hung there, pathetic, reflexive, useless. I felt nothing. Not rage. Not longing. Not grief. Just clarity. "You stopped 5 years ago," I said evenly. "You just didn't tell me." His jaw trembled. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." Emily let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Fix it?" she repeated. "You were married to someone else for our entire relationship." He turned toward her, desperation flaring. "I was going to tell you. I just—" "Stop," she said. The word carried less heat now, not explosive, just final. He looked between us, two women who had once been separate worlds, now unified by the same understanding. His advantage had always been fragmentation. Now he faced convergence. He had nowhere to pivot. "I messed up," he whispered. The understatement was almost absurd. Emily's mouth tightened. "You didn't mess up. You sustained 2 long-term relationships through sustained deception. That's not a mistake. That's a system." The word landed hard. System. Because that's what it had been, designed, maintained, optimized. He had no response. I stepped forward slightly. "There's one more thing," I said. Both of them looked at me. Michael's expression flickered, fear now layered under guilt. I reached into my folder and pulled out a final document. Joint tax filings. Marital status, married. All 5 years. I placed it on the counter in front of Emily. She read. Her face went completely still. Then she looked up at him slowly. "You told me you were single," she said. He swallowed. "I was separated." The lie fell apart instantly. The date stamps glowed between us. Continuous marriage. No separation. Her eyes hardened in a way that felt irreversible. "You filed as married," she said quietly. "While living with me." He opened his mouth. Closed it. There was no architecture left to hide inside. I watched something in Emily shift from emotional injury to structural realization, legal, financial, existential. Her voice went cold. "Did you use our address?" Silence. "Michael," she said. "Yes." The word came out small. Her eyes closed briefly. When they opened, the devastation had condensed into something lethal. "Get out," she said. Not loud. Absolute. He looked at her, at me, like he might beg again. But the room had changed. Neither of us needed anything from him anymore. He lifted the duffel slowly. At the door, he turned once more. "Jess," he said. I met his eyes. There was a time that look would have undone me, love, regret, shared history. Now it held only consequence. "You should have told me the truth," he said weakly. I almost smiled. "You had 5 years." He flinched. Emily opened the door. Cold hallway air rushed in. Michael stepped through it, displaced from the life he'd occupied minutes earlier. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Silence flooded the condo. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Emily sank into a chair, elbows on knees, hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook once. Twice. I didn't touch her. Didn't speak. Because grief like this isn't shared through comfort, only through presence. After a minute, she exhaled slowly and looked up at me. "Thank you," she said hoarsely. The words surprised me. "For telling me," she added. "Before I wasted more years." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded once, mutual recognition, nothing more needed. 2 lives altered in one night. But something else had shifted too. Michael's power had always been secrecy. Now it was gone. His architecture dismantled. His parallel worlds collapsed into one exposed truth. And for the first time in 5 years, neither of us was living inside his lie anymore. I didn't leave right away. Neither of us seemed ready to move, like if we stood up too quickly, the reality of what had just happened would tilt and crash again. Emily poured 2 glasses of water with hands that still shook slightly and slid one toward me across the counter. "Here," she said. "Thanks." We drank in silence. The condo felt different now, the air thinned of his presence, the space subtly redefined. Objects that had belonged to a shared life now looked like evidence: his jacket over a chair, his mug by the sink, shoes near the door. Artifacts of someone erased mid-sentence. Emily followed my gaze. "I'm going to throw everything out," she said flatly. I understood the impulse. Physical purge as emotional triage. But I also recognized something else, the aftershock phase. The moment when adrenaline fades and structural consequences begin to surface. "You don't have to decide tonight," I said gently. She leaned back against the counter, eyes red but steady. "I do," she said. "Because if I stop moving, I might collapse." "Fair." I nodded. She studied me for a moment, curiosity threaded through exhaustion. "How did you find out?" she asked. "The elevator," I said. Her brow creased. "An old coworker told me Michael had been back in the US for 5 years." She stared. "He never went overseas?" "No." The word still felt unreal even now. She exhaled shakily. "He told me that too. That he'd just come back after years abroad. Same origin story. Different timeline. He'd recycled his own fiction as biography." Her mouth twisted. "God. I really believed him." "So did I," I said. Our eyes met, not in comparison, but in shared recognition. Betrayal doesn't make victims rivals. It makes them witnesses. She rubbed her temples. "I keep replaying everything. Trips. Work nights. Times he said he had to travel." Memory recalibration had begun. It would take months. "I waited," I said quietly. 5 years. Thought he was coming back." Her face crumpled briefly, grief not just for herself now, but for me too. "That's cruel," she whispered. I nodded once. We stood there, 2 women mapping the same devastation from opposite sides. After a moment, she straightened. "Are you going to divorce him?" The question landed practical, grounded. "Yes." "Good." No hesitation. Just alignment. She crossed her arms again, gaze drifting around the condo, the life she'd built, now contaminated by hidden context. "I bought this place with him," she said quietly. 3 years ago. I felt the weight of that immediately. Shared asset. Shared debt. Shared future assumptions. "Did you know he was still legally married?" I asked. "No." The answer carried iron certainty. "He said his ex was long gone. No contact." My stomach tightened. He'd erased me in her world as completely as he'd hidden her in mine. 2 total realities. Both false. She looked back at me. I don't hate you, she said suddenly. I don't hate you either. It mattered to say it aloud. Because this kind of collision could easily twist into rivalry. He'd probably assumed it would. Instead, the opposite had happened. We'd compared notes. And found the same man. Emily exhaled slowly, tension easing just a fraction. What happens now? She asked. The question hung larger than either of us individually. Because his collapse had ripples, legal, financial, emotional. For me? I said. Lawyer. Divorce. Asset recovery. She nodded. For me, eviction. Legal separation of property. Therapy, probably. A faint, humorless smile touched her mouth. Lots of therapy. I almost smiled back. Yeah. She glanced toward the door where he'd left. I can't believe he thought he could maintain this, she said. I considered that. He didn't think we'd ever meet, I said. Her eyes lifted to mine. He thought distance was protection. A quiet understanding passed between us. Distance had been his shield. Truth had removed it. Emily pushed away from the counter. I'm going to change the locks tomorrow, she said. And call a lawyer. I nodded. Good. She hesitated, then added softly, You're welcome to come back if you need documents or anything. The offer held no awkwardness. Just practical solidarity. Thank you, I said. We stood facing each other one last moment, strangers connected by 5 years of the same lie. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. Brief. Fierce. Wordless. Not comfort. Acknowledgement. When we pulled apart, her eyes were clearer. So are you, she said quietly. Free now. The word landed deep. Free. 5 years of waiting had ended not with reunion, but revelation. I picked up my folder, lighter now. Michael's double life was over. His secrets exposed. His 2 worlds collapsed into one shared truth. And for the first time in years, my future no longer included him at all. The divorce process started the next morning. Not with tears or dramatic confrontations, just a phone call and a calendar appointment. Infidelity cases are usually straightforward when documentation exists, the attorney said after reviewing my files. And you have substantial documentation. That was one word for it. 5 years of letters, financial filings, communication logs, and confirmed cohabitation formed a paper trail most cases never saw. Michael hadn't just cheated. He'd maintained a legally active marriage while representing himself as single in another domestic partnership, with shared property. Systemic deception leaves fingerprints everywhere. By noon, separation filings were underway. By evening, he'd called 12 times. I didn't answer. He left 3 voicemails. I saved them. Evidence of post-exposure panic, tone fractured, language incoherent. Jess, please call me. Jess, I can fix this. Jess, I never meant for it to happen like this. The phrases blurred together, remorse without accountability, urgency without substance. 5 years of planning had collapsed in one night. Now he was improvising. Too late. Emily texted that afternoon. Locks changed. Lawyer Monday. Thank you again. I replied. Same here. We'll both be okay. She sent a single word back. Yes. Not comfort. Certainty. Over the next week, Michael's world contracted visibly. His attorney contacted mine, defensive posture, minimal concessions. Emily's lawyer contacted him, property dispute initiated. His employer requested a meeting, conflict of interest review triggered by address inconsistencies in filings. Parallel lives don't collapse cleanly. They implode across every system they touched. I didn't pursue vengeance actively. I didn't need to. Truth was already doing structural damage. Still, one final step remained, closure not for him, but for me. So on a gray Thursday morning, I met him once more. Neutral ground. Attorney's office conference room. He looked wrecked. Unshaven, eyes hollow, posture bent, not theatrical remorse, just the physical wear of someone who'd lost stability in every direction at once. He stood when I entered. Jess. I sat without responding. My attorney began outlining terms: asset division, spousal claims, liability exposure. Michael barely seemed to hear. His eyes stayed on me. Finally he spoke. I'm sorry. The words were soft, stripped of performance. I considered them. Not their sincerity, their relevance. You're sorry you got caught, I said. His face flinched. No, he whispered. I'm sorry I hurt you. The distinction mattered to him. Not to me. You replaced me, I said evenly. And kept me waiting while you built another life. His hands trembled on the table. I thought I could come back eventually. I almost laughed. After how long? I asked. 10 years? 15? Once you got bored. He had no answer. Because the plan had never included truth. Just indefinite maintenance. I leaned forward slightly. You didn't lose me because you loved someone else, I said. You lost me because you believed I'd accept never knowing. The words landed heavier than anger. They named the core. He broke then, shoulders folding, breath hitching. I did love you, he said helplessly. Maybe he had. Once. But love without honesty is just possession. You loved access, I said quietly. Not partnership. Silence filled the room. My attorney resumed discussion. Signatures. Dates. Finalization steps. Michael signed mechanically, like someone watching his own life dissolve through glass. When it was done, I stood. He looked up, panic flickering once more. Is this it? He asked. Yes. The word felt clean. Absolute. He swallowed hard. Will you ever? No. I didn't let him finish. Because forgiveness wasn't required for freedom. I picked up my bag. At the door, I paused, not for him, but for myself. 5 years ago, I'd watched him leave believing he'd return. Today, I watched him remain behind, permanently outside my life. I stepped into the hallway without looking back. And for the first time since the elevator, the past finally felt closed. 6 months later, I stopped waiting for something to hurt. That was the strangest part of healing, not the gradual easing of pain, but the quiet realization that the pain had already left without announcing it. It happened on an ordinary Sunday. I was in my kitchen, barefoot, making coffee, sunlight slanting across the counter. The radio hummed softly. My phone buzzed with a friend's message about brunch plans. And for a moment, I just stood there, present, unfragmented, and realized Michael hadn't crossed my mind all morning. No replayed conversations. No phantom grief. No questions. Just absence. Clean absence. I leaned against the counter, coffee warm in my hands, and let the realization settle. I was free. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just fully. Life had reassembled itself around me in quiet layers over the months since the divorce finalized. Therapy, yes. Long walks. Sleep returning slowly. Meals shared with friends I'd neglected during years of waiting. Small domestic reclamations, repainting the bedroom, donating his preserved clothes, replacing the wedding photo with a framed landscape from a trip I'd taken alone in early spring. Places I'd postponed seeing until he came back. He never had. So I went without him. Emily and I stayed loosely in touch, not bonded by trauma, but connected by shared history no one else fully understood. Her property case resolved 3 months earlier. Michael forfeited his share to settle financial claims. She sold the condo soon after and moved closer to her sister. Last we spoke, she sounded steady. Turns out life is bigger than him, she'd said. Yes. It was. News of Michael filtered indirectly through legal updates and mutual professional circles. Career stalled. Internal investigation. Reputation damage. Not ruin, just consequence. I didn't follow closely. His trajectory no longer intersected mine. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. Not revenge. Release. That afternoon, I met friends at a riverside cafe, sunlight glittering off water, laughter drifting between tables. Someone asked about my upcoming travel plans. I'm thinking Italy, I said. Solo? They asked. I smiled. Yeah. The word carried no loneliness. Only autonomy. Later, walking home, I passed a jewelry store window. For years, wedding rings had triggered longing, the ache of distance, the promise of reunion. Now they looked like objects again. Metal and stone. Meaning restored to neutrality. I kept walking. That night, I opened a box I hadn't touched since the divorce, the last remnants of my marriage, a few photos, the ring, stray letters I'd kept not as evidence but as history. I sat on the floor and looked through them slowly. There had been love once. Real, imperfect, human love. That truth didn't disappear because he'd betrayed it later. But it also didn't obligate me to carry it forward. I placed the ring in a small velvet pouch and closed the box. Not erasing. Not clinging. Archiving. The past belonged where it had happened, behind me. I slid the box onto a high shelf and stood. The apartment felt fully mine now, every object chosen, every space inhabited without ghostly preservation. 5 years of waiting had ended in one night. 6 months of living had rebuilt everything else. Before bed, I stepped onto the balcony. City lights spread wide, air cool against my skin. Once, I'd stood in similar nights imagining Michael under a different sky, counting time until reunion. Now I stood alone, and felt no lack. Just presence. Just self. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, old reflex stirred, Michael? Then faded instantly. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever remained of him in the world no longer belonged in mine. I went inside, closed the door, and turned off the lights. And for the first time in years, the future felt entirely, quietly my own. A year after the elevator, I went back to the building. Not intentionally at first. My company had relocated offices across the city months earlier, and I hadn't thought about that old tower in a long time. But a client meeting brought me back to the same block, the same glass facade, the same revolving doors, the same faint smell of burnt coffee drifting from the lobby cafe. I paused outside for a moment. Traffic hissed past. People moved in and out, lives in motion. Nothing marked the place as significant. But for me, it was the fault line, the moment my old life split open and everything hidden beneath it surfaced. I stepped inside. The elevator bank looked unchanged, polished steel doors, mirrored walls, fluorescent light humming overhead. I pressed the call button and waited, heart steady. A year ago, I'd stood here exhausted, devoted, unaware. Now I stood grounded, autonomous, intact. The doors opened. I stepped in alone. The space smelled the same, industrial cleaner, stale air, but the memory attached to it had softened, like a scar no longer tender. I watched my reflection in the mirror panel. Same face. Different woman. The elevator began its ascent, floor numbers blinking upward. I remembered the exact moment Daniel's words had landed, Michael came back 5 years ago. The sentence that had detonated my marriage. At the time, I'd thought that was the worst moment of my life. I understood now it had been the most necessary. Truth doesn't destroy lives. It reveals which ones were already false. The elevator stopped at 12. Doors opened briefly, no one entered, then closed again. I exhaled slowly. 5 years of waiting had ended here. But what followed hadn't been ruin. It had been reclamation. I'd lost a husband. But I'd regain time, agency, self-trust, and something else I hadn't recognized at first, dignity. Michael had believed distance made me manageable. Believed devotion made me stationary. Believed he could leave me preserved indefinitely while he lived elsewhere. He'd been wrong. Not because I exposed him, but because I moved. I chose truth over illusion. Closure over waiting. Self over attachment. The elevator reached my floor. Door slid open. I stepped out, then paused, hand lightly touching the metal frame. A year ago, I'd left this space in shock, reality collapsing under my feet. Today, I left it carrying something far steadier. Perspective. Betrayal had rewritten my past. But it had also rewritten my future, removing a life that was never truly mine and forcing me to build one that was. I walked down the hallway toward my meeting, heels quiet on carpet, posture easy. At the end of the corridor, sunlight poured through tall windows overlooking the city. I stopped there a moment, looking out. Movement everywhere, traffic streams, cranes turning, people crossing streets and intersecting paths. Lives diverging and converging constantly. Mine had diverged sharply that night. And it had led somewhere better. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from a friend about dinner plans later. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Simple. Present tense. No waiting. I slipped the phone away and headed into the conference room. As the door closed behind me, the past remained exactly where it belonged, outside, contained, no longer defining the space I occupied. A year ago, I'd learned my marriage was a lie. Today, I lived a life that wasn't. And that, more than revenge, more than exposure, was the real ending Michael had never imagined. Because the woman he'd left waiting in one reality had walked out of it entirely. And she never went back.